Hello and welcome back to Flash Fiction Fridays. I'm Teresa Garcia, or Amehana Arashi, depending on where you know me from. Now, this particular episode is a little bit late, so it's going to be going up the same day that the normal episode is to be going up. To start with, I'm going to read one of the stories that I wrote for Flash Fiction Month in July 2019. This was number 5 for the prompt series, and it's titled, I Hate Updates. Carol sighed in exhaustion as she hit save, flopped backward, and then glugged the last of her 20th cup of coffee for the day. She shook. She hurt. She wanted to puke to infinity. It was done. Finally done. How many times had she had the drafts gone over before implementing or rejecting the suggestions from her proofreaders? She no longer remembered. She didn't even care anymore. Her thesis was done. Fed called, and the call was answered without even changing. The next day, Carol managed to pry her eyes open. 5 cups of coffee later, she was functional enough to shuffle from the table to the computer desk, planning to print her monstrosity to hand in. A button press, and the monitor was on. A mouse jiggle, and the computer did not wake. Her heart fell to her stomach before she pushed the button on the computer itself. The tower fired up, and the Windows boot screen flashed, then went blue. No, I didn't back it up last night. Trying again after unplugging it a while yielded the same results. In tears, she called her professor, let him know what was happening, and then hauled the tower out to take to her usual techie after calling him too. Hopefully he could fix it, or at least slave her hard drive so she could get her files. Sure, she could redo the last changes if she needed to from the backup of the night before, but that would still take a while. William met her at his door with coffee, tools already out and ready at his table. Just a warning, Windows XP forced updates last night. There might be a lot I have to do. Anything. Gotcha. Harvey's already been notified that I might have to place an order. You're the best. What else are big brothers for? He smiled. The next day, a new hard drive cable thanks to XP's evil forcing a swap from one to another, and a great deal of cussing later, Carol had her file, her thesis printed to hand in, and 2 lectures about auto backup, which wouldn't have happened anyway thanks to when the forced update went through. And that was I Hate Updates by yours truly, Teresa Garcia. Now, how on earth does this pertain to myths and folklore? Well, technology has a lot of its own folklore, and by now, Windows XP is getting pretty much into the folklore and legendary status, especially with how those updates always messed up something. And it carries over, of course, into every single Windows since. That's truly a terrifying thing. Now, another flash fiction that I will read for this episode is going in a rather different direction. And this is also one that I wrote for Flash Fiction Month. This was written for Day 8. The title is Delusion. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath. His quiver full of children surrounded him, all straight and true, modestly fletched. Looking back over his life, he was pleased with all he'd done. Every tiny thing that the fathers had told him to do, he had followed to the letter of their laws. Those who called different names in their prayers or didn't pray at all, he shunned. He'd given to his neighbors, so long as they'd been strong in shared faith, or seemed to. He'd helped the sick until he found out they were dressed as the opposite gender, had refused to fill birth control pills for anyone, had dropped patients that had remarried or had abortions. Further, no mixed fibers nor unclean foods passed his lips. He had brought up his children to follow the same rules, all in the glory of the fathers and the almighty green papers. Gently he exhaled and drifted away, secure in knowing he would be entering the heavenly money bins to caretake the treasures for his master. In another room, another house, but the same street, another old man lay on his deathbed. Regret filled his every breath for all that he had thrown away over his life. After he chose alcohol over his wife and children, he had stopped even trying to be virtuous, especially after she left with the kids. It had been one woman after another in the bars, and he had liked it that way up until they no longer even looked his way. Eventually, he too expired. Both opened their eyes in the same place, both expecting to be judged. The room around them was sere, half below the moon and half below the sun. The throne reaching to the sky and the depths in black and white marble majesty. As expected, the figure seated on the throne could not even be seen, too rarefied for their unworthy eyes, a mere shifting glob of shifting mist. The being considered before it spoke, a language unfamiliar to both rolling through them, but they somehow understood. The joyous face of the first man broke and fell in rage and grief. The second broke in surprise and relief. Another set of words, these carrying sorrow and reprimand, followed, and both gasped in shock. All they had been taught was wrong. Sin was not what they had thought. The mist shifted and the souls were cast back into the world. As time flowed in their new incarnations, a male and female anglerfish eventually crossed paths in the depths. The male latched on, and the pair fused into one being, and this being and two souls eventually came back before the throne of judgment. And that was Delusion. Now this was inspired by the prompt for the 8th day, which had, as I recall, something to do with an unfair fate. I highly encourage you to get on DeviantArt and look up the Flash Fiction Month group and look for the prompt for the 8th day of 2019. Perhaps you might want to work through the various prompts yourself on your own time, because they are quite fun to work with. And that is going to be all that I read for this particular episode of Flash Fiction Fridays. If you want to get your flash fiction featured on the podcast, especially if it has anything to do with myth or folklore or legends, please feel free to write me at ladyrainstardragon@hotmail.com or THG StarDragon Publishing @gmail.com. If your work I do decide to use on the podcast, I do pay $3 per story because they are short. And I don't have a particularly large amount of money to work with, but I do want to be able to pay you for your work. You, of course, retain copyright, and you get to go on to continue to print it wherever, submit it wherever, because it is your work, unlike some places that like to buy it and keep it all to themselves. Until next time, I'm Teresa Garcia, and this has been Flash Fiction Fridays. I believe we're on episode number 20.